Inspiration can come from many places and take many forms. A nightmare can lead a man to write a novel that gives birth to an entirely new genre, Gothic literature. A story about a chandelier counterweight falling in the middle of the opera performance can inspire the creation of a character who later becomes the heart of one of the most financially successful musicals in history. And watching that same musical can move me to process my emotions through coloring, creating a huge double-page spread. Hi, my name is Veronica, and today we're talking about The Phantom of the Opera. Living in London, I had an opportunity to see it in the very same His Majesty's Theatre. It was firstly shown in 1986. And though the original production run was cut short in 2020 by the pandemic, the new run opened at the same theatre in 2021 and had only minor changes. But my first introduction to the story was actually a 2004 movie adaptation, which received, let's say, mixed reviews. And also I was like 15 watching it. So going to the theater, I didn't expect much, but boy was I impressed. Only after seeing this, I understand why this show is so extremely popular. And as someone who processes emotions best through art, I knew that there was only one way to truly express my admiration and relive this magic. No, not by listening the original cast score like 16 times, though I did it as well, but by coloring and illustration inspired by The Phantom of the Opera. And the moment I made a decision, I instantly knew which illustration I wanted to transform. Originally, this illustration dedicated to the Beauty and the Beast, but I think it can be easily transformed to fit one of the most iconic scenes from The Phantom of the Opera. No, not the one with the boat, but the Masquerade scene from the beginning of the second act. I thought about transforming this cat into Phantom of the Opera because, yeah, he's on the right angle, so I can easily draw the mask there. And then the rest of the animals will be guests on the masquerade, and I can transform this bunny into Christine. But I decided to go in slightly different direction, and I will transform this cat into Raoul, and this squirrel, I don't know, animal, will be the Phantom of the Opera, and he will wear his iconic red death costume. And the rest of the animals will be guests, and I think that I will draw the chandelier, so I will cover these flowers, and for the view outside the window I will transform it as well. I think I will do this mystery fog. I know that there is no staircase on this picture, unfortunately, but it is what it is. It is still the best one to fit this scene. So to make this massive transformation in terms of lines, I need to basically redraw a lot of this page, and I will use Tair for it, white acrylic paint. So I will cover all the elements I want to redraw and will work with pencils on top of this paint. So I will work in sections. I don't want to cover all the page with these acrylics because they really transform in the paper texture. So you're working like on very fine sandpaper, and I'm not a fan of it. And this book has beautiful paper, which works really great with pencils, but I still have to cover the whole section if I choose to cover even the small element on it, because the colors on this material look much brighter. I also want to mention that this is literally my first attempt in transforming the page, so I never did it before. So no more words, let's dig into the process. I'm using flat brush with very short hair. I find it easier to work with that kind of brush because the acrylic is quite thick, so I'm trying to spread it in a very thin layer. Though I'm using reference to draw the chandelier, I also have to work around the lines that are already on the page. So I'm trying to combine the copying from the reference with embracing the elements that are already there. This way I will not have a lot of black lines peeking through, because some of them are quite thick, like the ones on the curtains, and by using them in my design I will hide them better. For the base layer I decided to use pencils. They're much more transparent than acrylics and give accuracy which watercolors can't provide. So at this point I'm just trying to establish the darkest and the lightest points of the chandelier, just working around placing these small dots which are representing the reflections on the diamonds of the chandelier. But I will definitely use another layer of acrylic paints to reinforce the color, hide the black lines completely and make the bright points really, really bright. My head will be constantly in the frame because I'm still figuring out how to set the equipment right. And this is the first time when I'm really trying to shoot every little detail of the process. So it takes practice, just as coloring. So with acrylics I'm applying the same principle, just putting a lot of very small dots. I used dark brown, skin tone and yellow and a bit of white. When I started, I wasn't really sure whether it will work or not, because I never draw anything myself on the page, but I'm pretty happy with the final result and I felt pretty good about myself, about the page, and was looking forward to the rest of the piece. It took me about 3 to 4 hours and I thought that the rest of the work will be as fast as this piece. So I'm always trying to paint my light sources first, because after you've done this, you can easily tell where your reflections are going to be placed, and this way it will be much easier to make it look consistent. So now I will proceed to my darkest point, and I think that it would be behind the windows. I really want to finish with the background first before I tackle the main characters. So I started with covering the window frames with masking fluid. This way I will have clear borders and my watercolors won't be all over the place. I'm using simple synthetic brush, but I'm thinking about buying synthetic brush without hair because my application isn't so even and some of the fluid always stain on the brush, which only making the application more tricky. I'm using very simple watercolors, just 12-piece set of white nights. One mistake I made there is using a brush that is too small. This way I gain this grainy texture. And by the way, you can easily work with watercolors on acrylics. They will behave slightly different, but if the acrylics are not glossy but matte, it's still doable. I'm always using this trick on a very thin paper, which is not suitable for watercolors, and they perform just fine. Also, my greatest fear when I'm working with watercolors is to go too dark too fast, but the thing I always forget is that they actually fade a bit. So the rule of thumb there would be applying a bit too dark or too bright. This way you will not lose the brightness and saturation when everything will be dried out. I'm also using wet on wet technique here, so before applying the actual watercolors, I'm basing the section with water. So the paper, in my case acrylic, will be nice and wet. Also, I'm finding the process of removing the masking fluid so satisfying. Out of all windows, I'm not very happy with this window around the characters, because we can see this white fog traveling throughout the windows everywhere except there. As you can see, you can't actually see so much of the black lines now. Well, they are visible, but I don't think that it's a problem. Well, so far, I think it's a pretty decent job. And while I was working on window frames, I firstly experienced boredom. Pencil process is much slower than painting, and I didn't baste the window frames with watercolors, which I would most certainly do if I would start this piece from scratch now. Also, I used a lot of castle arts on the frames, and I still can't say that I like these pencils. I'm kinda okay with them, but sometimes the tone is not layering well no matter what I do, and sometimes you start to rip off the previous layer of the pencils with your next layer, and this becomes quite frustrating. On the other hand, they have a very nice range of bright out there colors, but most certainly no match for polychromos or Prismacolors, that's for sure. Despite all my attempts to fix it with acrylics, this window is a bit off, but I just decided to let it go because after every next layer it's become worse and worse. And yeah, I finished with windows. Firstly, I thought about not putting any highlights and shadows at all. And you can see it on this window, it's very flat. And here I already started to put some highlights because I thought that it's too plain, and I was kind of right, because now the best window in my opinion is this one, and this is the heaviest shaded one. So now I'm going to proceed to curtains. I decided to do all the curtains in red. They are folded in a very strange way, so I know how to shade this one, but I don't know actually what to do with these ones because I can't really imagine how they are folded. So I will try to find some reference photo for the curtains and then pick my shadings according to the reference. But they all will be in bright and dark red. I'm thinking about making this on the front dark red and the one on the back a bit brighter. Just like with the window frames, I decided to do the groundwork with pencils, moreover with polychromos, and while they have a beautiful range of deep reds, I still should have think about basing them with watercolors first, because the amount of time I spent on this single curtain is just insane. It took me about 4 hours, just this small piece. And it was like 100% unnecessary because it's a background element. But at this point, I didn't have any positive experience with the watercolor base layer yet. And I thought that the color of your base watercolor layer should match the highlights. And this is why I always tended to go too light. So I watered my watercolors too heavy. It was just like slightly colored water, but actually it should match the middle tones. So now I know it, and you will see how I applied this knowledge to the other curtains and how much faster the process will be. I'm really considering covering all the walls in just pure black. It will make an illusion that there is like no walls, only these windows that are like floating in the middle of nowhere. And I'm really thinking about making the floor black marbles or black glass, like my table. It's very reflective material, so you can see my hand reflected in the table. So all this scene, all these colors from costumes of the characters and from curtains will be reflected on the floor. And after I finish with the characters, I can really decide all of this. And I think it will be like in like 2 days because there is exactly 13 characters in this scene. And I'm really planning to spend a lot of time on the main characters. So I will meet you on the other side of the curtains. I also planning to do gold for these elements on these curtains in front of us, and to do roses in gold, maybe with a slight tone of green. You know, sometimes gold have this green undertone. I decided to use 2 shades of Prismacolors and black polychromos. Just applying layer after layer, trying to make shades like really dark. And because I use very bright watercolor shade, I don't really need to think about the highlights. After applying all my initial layers, I'm using liquid blender to make the transition smoother and get rid of all these pencil strokes. This step is not necessary when you're working just with pencils and not using any watercolor basing, but if you would like to have a smooth result and not burnish your page, you have to use Blender. And for all this, I didn't use any kind of blender, I just burnished my page. Also, I'm not a very big fan of using blender on top of the white acrylics, which I used here to cover the black lines and make roses more realistic looking. So if you are trying to use Blender on this acrylic basing, in my experience, the end result looks a bit more messy because the pigments start to move around a lot and do not stick as well as it do on the paper. This is why with this media I prefer to use burnishing method. In this part of the video I slowed down a little bit so you can see the layering process in detail. So I'm just switching between pencils, trying to make the shades deeper and find this balance between green, orange and yellow, while leaving the highlights really bright, and later I will even reinforce them with the white pen. If you went too dark on some element or covered your highlight, you can easily fix it with electric eraser. For leaves, I choose slightly different color combination with more orange in it in order to better visually separate the flowers with the leaves. So while I'm coloring the curtains, let me discuss with you my top 5 differences between the actual book, The Phantom of the Opera, and the musical. I find it really fascinating how much the story has evolved, and while a lot of changes were made, I can't say that the musical is like a completely separate story that has nothing in common with the book. It's simply not true. I think Andrew Lloyd Webber really catched the spirit of the book while making a lot of details simpler and easily applicable for a very short format of 2 hours musical. So change number 1. The character of Persian is completely absent in the musical. In the book, Persian plays a critical role in helping Raoul navigate the labyrinth beneath the opera house and find Christine, and also for us, the readers, to understand the Phantom's past. You can say that in the musical Madame Giry taken some of the narrative functions, but her brief description of the Phantom's past is no match for a whole 2 chapters of very detailed explanations of the time when Eric lived in Persia and also in Russia for some reason. But to the musical credits, I watched already like 4 or 5 different adaptations of Phantom of the Opera in cinema, and none of them have the Persian character exactly as he was written in the book. You may argue that the 1925 movie have a Persian character, and to my taste this exact adaptation is the closest to the book we ever get. But right before our main characters go down to the opera's basement. He reveals himself as being a white guy who's just pretending to be a Persian to disguise himself because he's basically a cop. I still can't figure out why they made this decision, but it is what it is. So number 2. In the novel, Raoul has an older brother, Philip, the Count de Chagny, who, while not entirely opposed to Raoul's relationship with Christine, is strongly against their marriage. Since Philippe is without children, Raoul is expected to inherit the family title, making his romantic choices a matter of noble obligation. Towards the end of the book, Philippe mysteriously drowns in the underground lake beneath the opera house, which led us to the next key difference. Number 3. The Phantom's murders are more ambiguous in the book. So in the musical, it made very clear that Eric, the Phantom, is a killer. However, the book leaves space for interpretation. When Eric comes to Persian in the end of the book, he insists that he has nothing to do with the fall Chandelier, for example. And he also claims that Philip's death was like an accident caused by the Count's own recklessness. So, that said, whether or not one chooses to believe Eric is another matter entirely, though Persian believed him. And he's the only character in the book who goes like very far back with Eric, and we as a reader kinda can rely on his opinion. The next scene is Eric's appearance is far more horrifying in the book, which is also was very well depicted in the 1925 movie. The musical Phantom is depicted with some disfigurements. It is nowhere near as grotesque as description in the novel, where Eric's appearance is truly terrifying. He is extraordinarily thin, and his black coat hangs loosely on his skeletal frame. His eyes are so deep set that you cannot make out his pupils. All you can see are 2 big black holes, as in the skull. His skull is stretched over his bone structure like a drumhead, and is not white but an ugly yellow. His nose is almost non-existent when seen sideways, and his absence is a horrible thing to behold. As for his hair, it consists of no more than 3 or 4 long dark strands on his forehead and behind his ears. Well, that's a nightmare material. In contrast, the musical's Phantom, while having some scars, is still conventionally attractive, well, at least while he is wearing mask, and given the era in which the action of the novel takes place, with all these endless wars on Europe continent, I think there were a lot of men who actually come back from war in much worse shape than the Phantom of the Opera in the musical. And I don't think that they were as stigmatized. So it's kinda don't make sense, but the description in the novel is far more horrifying and actually aligned with Gothic horror traditions. And the last one, number 5, the connection between Raoul and Christine. The book provides far more backstory on how Raoul and Christine knew each other before the events of the main plot. They had shared tender feelings as children, making their sudden romance much more understandable and much less sudden. In the musical, we are briefly told that they knew each other as children, but that's all. And it is given very little weight. All this make their rapid love declarations seem rather rushed. So what do you think? Have you read the book? Or you only saw the musical? Have you even saw the musical? Do you want to? Please leave a comment. I'm really interested in your thoughts on the matter. Alright, I finished Christine off camera. Yeah, I just ran out of the storage space on my camera, so I had to like wait, and I was so close to finish that I cannot wait. So here we are. So I like how she turns out, despite a very clumsy work on the fur. I don't know why. I thought I had a grip on it. I thought I like learned how to actually color fur, but apparently not. The thing that I'm really not proud of with Christine is this stain. I just used Brutfuner macaroon for the purple, and then I wanted to make the shade deeper, but you know, brute forms are not actually made for this. Every next level of pencils that I was layering actually was ripping off the previous layer, and it was just a mess. So I erased it and then decided to went with acrylics over it, and that was a mistake. But then I kinda sort of a little bit improved it with polychromosis, but it still does not look good, and I don't want to keep going and going on this place, so I just left it as it is. But anyway, I'm happy with Christine. Very lovely bunny. So I can move to the cat. Oh my gosh, wish me luck. He's gonna wear the black outfit with some golden details, and it will be really hard for me to make him stand out because I already have a black background and golden details. So yeah, just wish me luck. And while I'm coloring this couple, what a better time to talk about Raoul and Christine. The dynamic between those two characters in the novel and the musical is completely different, almost a full 180-degree shift. In the novel, Raoul is a very young man, only 21 years old. He is emotional, jealous, and impulsive, and he is also a sailor who is scheduled to depart for an expedition to Antarctica in a month. He deeply loves Christine, but she acts mysteriously, telling him they cannot be together while simultaneously sending him mixed signals. By the way, Raoul's older brother Philip believes the whole Phantom story is just that, a story. He suspects that Christine is manipulating Raoul to force him into marriage. While Raoul might not fully believe in the supernatural elements of Christine's tale, he is absolutely certain that Eric exists and is trying to win Christine's love. The dynamic in the musical is drastically different. First of all, at the beginning of the Act 2, Raoul and Christine are already engaged. This technically happens in the book as well, but in the novel, their engagement is more of a secret fantasy, a game they play. Secondly, Raoul in the musical is much more dismissive of Christine's fears. He assumes she is just imagining things, even after the Phantom literally murders a man in front of the entire opera house. In contrast to his novel counterpart, the musical's Raoul is more mature, has much more influence over the opera's management, and takes a far more active role in trying to capture the Phantom. However, his plan to catch Eric is simply ridiculous. In the novel, Raoul doesn't try to set a trap, he merely waits for Christine's performance to end so he can take her away. Her disappearance from the stage is much more sudden and far less dramatic. There is no extended musical number when she and the Phantom sing together in front of everyone. The Phantom simply takes her, and, by the way, this moment happens only halfway through the book. And the rest of the book unfolds quite differently from the musical. A significant portion is dedicated to Eric's backstory, as well as Raoul and Persian's desperate struggle to escape the Phantom's elaborate traps beneath the opera house. Just like in the musical, Christine ultimately saves everyone, not through force or cunning, but through compassion. Her kindness towards Eric convinced him to release Raoul and herself, allowing them to live together. However, the way this moment plays out is drastically different in the novel. Unlike in the musical, where Eric forces Christine to kiss him under the threat of Raoul's life, Christine in the book chooses to kiss Eric of her own free will, after the danger has passed. It is an act of pure empathy, and in my opinion, this ending is far more powerful and emotionally satisfying. So at this point, I finished with this part of the page and completely covered this with baking paper, and I will not touch this until the end. So now I have this part of this double page spread where there is basically almost nothing done. I really have a lot of going on this part of the page, and also I need to draw masks for each of them. I think I will be able to finish it sooner than this part because I'm willing to base all the animals with watercolors. It will speed up the process. Yeah, so this is my plan. So background, masks, base coating, and pencil work. Yeah, we'll try to speed up. So finally you can see the end result. I'm happy that today is a very sunny weather here in London. I'm really happy how almost everything turns out. I don't know, I can't see a single element that I'm not super happy with, because for my level of skills, this is impressive work. If you wonder how long it took me, well, I started on the 6th of February and today is the 17th of February. Yeah, not all of these days were coloring days, but still. So thank you for watching. If you like this video and you want to see more of the content like this, please subscribe and we'll see you on the next one. Bye!